Hi friends, thanks for being here. Dr. Shaheen, and in this video I'm going to talk about depression, my experience with it, what I learned in my medical training about depression, and then how I healed it using my own dive deep into the spiritual world and different esoteric practices. So let me begin by saying I'm no expert on this topic, but to be honest, I'm not sure who he is. The thing is that you have to realize depression isn't a disease in and of itself. It's often portrayed that way, but the way I see it is that it's the end effect. It's the symptom of another cause. And often the cause is blindly explained as you've got a chemical imbalance. But yes, again, that is another characteristic of depression, but it's not the root cause. From my understanding, the root cause of depression, on some way or another, comes back to trauma, comes back to unmet physical, emotional, spiritual needs. So I'm going to go into that and let you know why and what depression is from that standpoint. So characteristically though, when someone says they're depressed, they might be referring to themselves feeling blue or feeling sad, feeling down. That in and of itself isn't depression. Medically, it's defined as at least being in a period of 2 or more weeks of being perpetually sad and experiencing a loss of motivation. Physically, you might be out of energy, have poor concentration, and at the extreme of it, experiencing suicidal ideations, just wanting to end things. That's the more extreme version of it, and a more chronic depression is more difficult to handle, to battle with, as it's just been in your system for a while longer. It becomes a thinking pattern that's harder to break. But here's a spell, or here's a myth that I want to break about depression. You know, we call it mental health, but I don't really believe that that's the case. Often, you know, in Western medicine, we like to separate the brain, the mind, the heart as these different systems that just work independently. But that's not the case. Mind and body are one of the same. At least in the Eastern tradition of things, there's no differentiation between those two. If I feel an emotion of anxiety, I'm going to feel that as a sensory experience somewhere in my body. And so these are intricately linked. And so we know from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's work that the body keeps the score. Emotions are stored in the body. This trauma that I'm talking about is stored in the body. And it's this that creates this heaviness, this difficulty that someone who's depressed finds in moving through that. It's more than just a perspective issue. So I'll go a bit more into trauma and let you know what that is. So the basic way to look at trauma is any experience that you have in your outside reality that's too much for your system to handle and leads you to feel overwhelmed and helpless. The degree to which the trauma leaves an imprint in your body or leaves you immobilized is the degree to which you feel helpless. So for example, if I'm in an assault situation as a male and I feel some degree of ability to respond, I don't feel as helpless. If it's someone that I don't really know, I might be more willing to respond with aggression. That might be less traumatizing to me than if, for example, I was being hit by a family member. In that context where I don't feel like I can respond, where I don't want to respond through aggression, I'm more likely to feel helpless. And again, this is a lot worse if you're in a sexual assault situation where you feel completely helpless. So it's an important point to understand. But what then happens is this emotion of overwhelmed gets stored in the body. It causes this freeze response. We know from a recent theory called the polyvagal theory that your nervous system is not just divided into 2 categories of rest and digest and fight or flight, but there's a third component of freeze. When something is too excessive, your nervous system goes into a collapse mode. This can become learned helplessness. And it's important to understand that when this phenomena happens, this excessive emotion is in your body and it's immobilizing you. And so then it's redundant to just work at the thought level. We need to work with the body and the emotions in the body and learn how to express them. Basically, is a mismatch between our external, outer world and our internal world. We, on some level, lose touch with our ability to understand what's going on inside. That's why people might be dissociated or seem disconnected or not have awareness of how they're feeling, except when it comes to those extreme points of violent outbursts. We lose that nuanced way or appreciation of our internal reality. So that's it in a nutshell in terms of how it relates to trauma. But here's a bigger implication. What happens is when you're traumatized or you go through some experience where you feel unsafe in the world, that feeling of unsafety, the feeling of insecurity, means that you begin to suppress your own needs. Now consider this, as a child you have all kinds of needs. You've got your physical needs. You need to drink water, to excrete, to have food, to have warmth, to have shelter. If some of those aren't met, you'll go into some form of distress. Now, the more difficult ones to know are the emotional, spiritual needs that we have. The need for belonging, the need for connection, the need for reassurance, the need for affection, the need for support. These are emotional needs that are not really prioritized and often neglected. But consider this, that when a newborn doesn't receive touch and affection from their mother, within 72 hours they have a chance of death. So that's how important emotional affection is to a human being. We are social creatures after all. This is inextricably linked to the neurochemistry within the brain. There are certain hormones such as oxytocin that won't be released if you're not receiving an adequate level of touch and care and affection. And we can give this to ourselves. And that's the key point. So what happens? You're traumatized, you lose connection with your own body, and you start to feel that the world is unsafe. And if you're in an unsafe world, it must mean that it's unsafe for you to ask for your needs. And so a coping mechanism, a survival skill that children develop is they depress, literal in the word, depression of their emotional needs. It's their mechanism of survival. Because the thought is that I don't want to be a further burden to this already chaotic environment. And so, over time, you lose touch and you lose a sense of what your needs are. And so you're going through this world through this compulsive, mechanistic way of being. And you lose that ability to empathize with yourself, to understand yourself, to love yourself, to care for yourself. You lose touch with your intuition. And in the process of healing, I'd say that there are several approaches that we need to take, but two of the approaches that just comes to my mind in this moment is we need to work with the body. We need to work with releasing these stored up traumas. That could be through mind-body practices such as yoga, meditation, qigong, acupuncture. There are various modalities that can be used to release this stored trauma. And some will work better for others, and this will be practitioner dependent as well. And it's not a magic quick fix pill situation that we're often looking for. It's taken a while for this to happen. It's an ingrained mental habit, and so it's going to take a bit of time to resolve this. And then approach 2 is working with the needs, working with understanding what your body's needs are. I recommend a book called Nonviolent Communication for this. That's great for laying it out. this idea that we have these particular needs. It lists the needs that you have that you need to learn how to meet, and then it becomes a skill development issue. When you're traumatized, your development is inhibited, arrested. You might not learn the ability of self-empathy. You might not learn the ability of empathy at all. Often that's the case. That's why there's so much internal judgment and hatred and frustration and anger, which often leads to that drive that we have, that a lot of us seem to admire, not realizing that it's often or can be coming from a place of fear and a place of frustration. And so it's important for us to learn what our needs are, acknowledge them, address them, and learn how to speak to ourselves differently. I know for myself, I used to be really hard on myself, and it's only recently that I've learned to be able to take things easy, to be patient with myself, to love and acknowledge myself, to meet my own needs through thinking, hey, I know there's a book called The Love Languages. What are those components? Touch, gifts, acts of service, words of affirmation. Hey, I can give that to myself. I can give myself a pat on the back. I can remind myself, I can reassure myself that I'm on the right track, that things are okay. In difficult times, I can be my own mentor, my own loving parent, and you can do that for yourself too. So improving the relationship you have with yourself is going to be key in the process of recovery from depression. And so again, there's no quick fixes. This will require you to entirely change your relationship with yourself, learn about your own needs, learn how to speak to yourself differently, and learn how to work with your nervous system. So on a physical level, changing your physical practices, integrating emotional and spiritual practices that help your nervous system calm down, or elevate if you're feeling very down already. So there's a time and place for each one of those things. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, comment below, like or subscribe. Let me know if you'd like more content like this. Let me know if you'd like me to go into more detail. And for now, thank you. Namaste.